When it comes to cooking, that is not one of my strengths. It is a skill that I've learned, but I have to measure everything perfectly in order to get something that comes out halfway decent. Unlike some of my sisters, my perception of them is that they can whip up something like 2 or 3 ingredients. It looks like they pull it out of their head, whip it together, and have this amazing meal. This lavishness of flavor that comes bursting forth in what they fix every time. And I ask them, how did you make it? Well, I don't know. I added a little bit of this or that. Nothing was measured. It was this wild abandon of food that's amazing. In today's gospel, we'll hear a parable where we cannot measure God's generosity. It comes to us in wild abandon, and the outcome is this fullness of life. We cannot measure God's generosity by our expectations or standards of expectation. So this gospel today, we're back to parables in Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 to 16. Stories, parables again, stories with a twist. And this one has a couple of them. It's actually one of my favorite parables. Jesus tells the disciples this story. The reign of God is like an owner of a vineyard who goes out at dawn to hire workers for the field. And they reach an agreement with these workers, with the owner, for a just wage, a daily wage, a full day's pay. Then the owner goes out again several times at mid-morning, which is around 9 a.m., around noon, around mid-afternoon, around 3, and even towards late afternoon, the owner goes out and finds workers and says, come work in my vineyard, late afternoon around 5 p.m. The boss has hired laborers throughout all of those days, and they've agreed on a fair wage. At the end of the day, now sundown at the time of the gospel, the sundown is the time that's considered the end of the day. The twist is the owner says, pay those who are last first. The last who got hired at the end of the day were the most needy. They weren't at the very beginning, the skilled laborers that needed work. And the owner says, pay them first. And the twist is they receive a full day's pay, a wage that provides a fullness of life for them. The other workers would think, hey, we're going to get more. We were there earlier in the day. The twist again is that the wage is the same for everyone, whether they showed up at dawn or at 5 and anywhere in between. And people are enraged. The first are enraged. And the owner says, I've done you no wrong. You agreed to that. You had that agreement. We paid you a fullness. You received a full day's wage. Jesus ends the parable with saying, remember, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. God is all about turning the world upside down, twisting our lives, throwing generosity with wild abandon, and ends up with this beauty of love. God is about the business of generosity and goodness. And we are asked to focus on our business of serving God without those expectations of what God needs to do. So this week, how will we serve in the vineyard of the world? And how will we serve in love while not judging God's generosity, but being the generosity of God that comes with no expectations, this wild abandon of love and service? And knowing that the twist is that when we serve the least needy receive a fullness of a just wage, for example, everyone is lifted up in the fullness of life. How do we focus on the business of what we need to do to serve, no matter what hour of day we show up to work with God in the vineyard of the world? Most importantly, how can we show up in a way that brings that generosity of God's love and service with wild abandon that serves everyone, especially those in most need, where we lift all of us up in the fullness of life for one another? So that the last is first and the first is last, in the sense that we're all in this together. All of us serving in the vineyard of the world with love, sprinkled in with God's generosity of wild abandon. Amen.